into the gritty, fascinating world of Detroit's criminal underworld with none other than Scott M. Burnstein. Scott is a leading expert on organized crime, a true crime historian, and the author of Detroit Crime Chronicles, a book that exposes the Mafia legends, ruthless drug pens, unsolved mysteries, and secret histories. Well, that's what we like here on Truth Be Told, and it's all shaped in the Motor City underworld. With the exclusive access to declassified federal documents and first-hand accounts, Scott takes us inside the lives of the figures such as the Purple Gang, Eddie Jackson, and of course, Jimmy Hoffa. If you think you know Detroit crime history, think again. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, author Scott M. Burnstein. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Oh, thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate it.
Of course. You know, this is one of my favorite topics growing up in Kansas. And in fact, my grandfather, we always wondered because he was part of the Teamster Union back in the probably 40s and 50s out here in California. He was a bricklayer. And he always kind of reminded me of a mafia type of guy. So I don't know.
Everyone's got one in their family,
right.
Or one that's connected to one who's connected to one.
Right.
It's a fun part of everybody's lineage to
right.
look back on the darker side of the bloodline.
Well, how did you get involved before we get into the books itself and the book itself? How did you get involved with knowing so much about the mafia background?
I actually grew up around a lot of stuff with not really being aware of it. Had it in my family history via the Burnstein brothers, who were the founders of the Purple Gang, which is the iconic Jewish mafia, and grew up hearing a lot of stories, and some other members of my family were, for lack of a better term, and I would say they were not mobsters, but mob adjacent.
Right.
And these are things that I didn't even really understand at the time, and I would learn later on in my research. But it wasn't anything that I really was interested in more than just dinner table conversation.
Right.
As a teenager or as a young man. Then I went to law school, and in law school in my early to mid 20s, I did an internship with the Illinois Attorney General's office in Chicago. It was in Chicago.
In Chicago, right.
It was the state AG, and they cycle you through different departments. So I was interning for about 2 years, and I got assigned. One of my assignments was to the organized crime division.
Oh, wow.
And that just sparked my interest. I was probably about 23, 24, 23, I think. Maybe about to turn 24. And was really exposed in real time to organized crime investigations, and got to shadow prosecutors and investigators. This was in the early 2000s.
Wow.
I mean, I was just a coffee boy. I wasn't I really wasn't, I
Scott,
wasn't.
Go give me some coffee.
By no means was I on the front line. I was just,
right.
I was there to be their gopher and just learn, basically keep your mouth shut and learn by observation. And it just got me, it like created this like itch to learn more and to bring to life a lot of the pop culture that I had consumed in terms of movies. I'd always been a huge fan of Goodfellas and The Godfather and Casino, way before I was ever interested in learning the true stories behind that stuff. And then when I learned that, oh wow, there's like, these are rooted in real life, tales and tribulations and murders that you kind of thought were just a movie were actually happened.
Right.
And from that, I got really eager to learn more and research. and I was lucky that I had some help with some mentors of mine in law school and in the internship I did that helped me get a book deal when I was 28, and I felt like it was kind of a natural journey from being in Chicago, going to law school, working these Chicago mob cases.
Right.
I use the term working. I don't want to take credit. I mean, I was literally just in the background, in the backseat of a car, or in the side of a meeting room where
Right,
everybody
right.
was. But I got to observe it firsthand, and I was like, well, if I want to continue writing about, or if I want to research about this, and I want to find a lane into writing about it, Detroit is my hometown. It's where I have already some built-in connections,
Right.
and I landed back home in about 2005, 2006 with a book deal to write about the Detroit mob. And
Wow.
I dove into the deep end of the pool, and it's been about 20 years since I got the book deal, 18 and a half years maybe since the book came out.
And can you
And then
okay, so what was the first book? What was the first book?
The first book was Motor City Mafia.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And that was more, it's kind of like I would say a cursory history of the Detroit Mafia. It doesn't go too deep into the weeds in terms of research. It's a lot of pictures, and a lot of kind of I would say the ABCs of Detroit mob history.
Right.
And then my next book about Detroit came 3 or 4 years later, called Detroit True Crime Chronicles, and that is more of a drill down, getting into the details and the nitty gritty of the Toko Zerilli crime family in Detroit, which is still in existence today. It's a lot different than it was in its heyday, but I think without question, anybody that studied this stuff, anybody that's considered an authority on organized crime in America history, Detroit is a standard bearer, is a anomaly in a lot of ways, which I guess maybe is an oxymoron to say they're a standard bearer, but at a certain point,
right,
I don't think I'm telling people something they don't know. At a certain point, the mafia imploded with cooperators and RICO investigations and movies like the ones we're talking about.
Right.
But in the glory era of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, Detroit was really the Ivy League, and they had put together a blueprint for how you do this and how you do it stealthily and deliberately, and through a method to madness that had a level of detail and being vertically integrated, diversified, insulated. They made it so nobody really went to prison. Nobody of real stature within the organization was ever killed. Wow. And they all got mega rich. So they're living the dream in the sense that after 80 years or 85 years, they're dying as free men, having never really done much prison time.
Right.
Having been responsible for dozens of murders.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And probably millions of dollars of stolen funds, but they've also made tens of millions in tens of millions in legitimate funds, because they're so smart,
business,
and educated, and they're just as lethal in the boardroom as they are on the street. So they die free, having not really done much prison time, having not incurred much violence to them, and rich like they're a corporate CEO.
Right.
Like not mob rich. They're not worth a couple 100,000 or a couple million.
Right.
These guys are worth tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah. You know, I'm sure you've been watching the series with Sylvester Stallone,
Yeah,
Tulsa.
I I don't want to say that I worked on Tulsa King. I worked on a project before it became Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone and
Right.
Paramount during the pandemic in 2020. I was involved in some development on a project that would eventually become Tulsa King.
What? But
So
I grew up
and
about an hour.
and I enjoy it. I enjoy it. It's great.
I grew up about an hour and 20 minutes from Tulsa in Kansas. So it kind of like perked my interest, and I love Sylvester Stallone, and I love the topic of the mafia, and you don't really think about where the mafia has gone. We think of like the big cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit, but you don't think about how they did control a lot of different areas in the country, different company.
In the heartland.
Yeah, the heartland. You don't even think about that, but it kind of brings a whole new light to how even impactful they are today, even though they're not as big. Maybe they are. I don't know. But
they're more impactful in white collar society today.
More corporation
than on the street, honestly. The power is in tech and in
right.
legitimate stuff that they can corrupt more so than bookmaking and loan sharking.
Right.
And even in drugs, because a lot of that has become legalized.
Right, especially in California. They're like, hey, I guess we'll go.
Well, I mean, in Michigan, marijuana is legal.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
We got four casinos down in the same couple mile radius in downtown Detroit and in Windsor, Canada.
Wow.
So it's taken a chunk out of the ability for them to make money, the mob to make money in those rackets. Talking about where you're from in Tulsa King, Kansas City has always been an underrated powerhouse.
Yeah, I lived in Kansas City for many years too.
But in terms of, and not just locally or not just in the heartland, Kansas City, at the height of power for them in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I mean, they weren't as powerful as New York or Chicago, but they were in that same lane.
Right.
They were at the forefront of all the stuff going on in Las Vegas, and the skimming of the casinos. They were at the forefront of Teamsters and control of the labor unions. Roy Williams, who was a Teamsters president in the mid 80s, was put there by Kansas City.
Wow.
By the Kansas City Mafia, the Sevilla crime family.
I did not know that. This is why we have people like Scott on that has done the research. And you said you've written 6 books.
I've had 6 books published. Yes.
Are you writing another one?
I've pivoted away from authoring, at least for right now. I think I eventually will write some more books, but just in the way that media is consumed right now in the 2020s, it's being more multimedia and less just written page. It is just the trend that is in existence, and it's where the money is. It's where the action is.
Yeah. And
unless you're somebody that just wants peace of mind and wants to publish because him or her want a piece of their artwork or their research out there.
Right. It's kind of a business card now.
Financially, there's really not a ton of benefit for you to author after you've already put out some books.
Right.
Because unless you're the less than 1% that can make money off of advances, constantly, writing a book, publishing a book, and then getting it advanced for a new book. But I've published on major labels. 4 of my 6 books have been published on major labels.
Oh, wow.
And when you look at each book and how much you make and how much time you have to put into it,
Not much.
It's like working at McDonald's.
Oh, geez. Okay, yeah.
So and it wasn't always like that. There was a point in time up until the last 20 years where you could make good money authoring but just the way it is right now, books aren't being consumed as much as they were in the past. So as a result, authors aren't being paid as much to write those books. So for me, when you break it down to putting food on my table, I have to, create content with my reporting and my research that I can make money with on a kind of consistent basis, as opposed to a lot of people that are publishing books right now that aren't getting huge advances are people that already have jobs, whether they be a sports reporter or a reporter at the Washington Post who gets a contract that might not be sustainable for a year, but they have a 6-figure contract with their initial employer that can supplement it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just do 5 minutes on.
No, it's interesting.
World right now.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I would like to. I'll say that probably my next book will coincide with a television or film that I'm working on, because that's another pivot I've made in the last 10 years, getting into Hollywood and working with development of television and film projects.
Well, that's where it needs to be, and plus even your podcast that you do, the original Gangster podcast, which I think I started podcasting in 2008, so they call me one of the OGs.
Way ahead.
It was actually online radio when I started, but it's a medium now that it reaches a lot of people, and people love that. It reminds me of podcasting, reminds me of old school radio back in the 30s, 40s, where people used to sit around and just listen to the stories. It really kind of reminds me of what that used to be. So before we get into the book and how you wrote these books, tell us a little bit more about your podcast.
So the Original Gangsters podcast, we are on I think 6 of 7 continents.
Wow.
Well over 10 million imprints across all of the platforms. We started off as just an audio podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and we were actually under the CBS radio banner, which then became I'm blanking on the name of the Odyssey. Then it became Odyssey.
Okay, yeah.
And so for the first 3 years, we were just audio through CBS Radio and then Odyssey. And the first year or second year, we were named top 20 true crime podcasts.
Wow, congrats!
I think it was, I don't know if it was radio.com or iHeartRadio put out a list. And then Time Magazine also gave us a shout out. And then in the end of 2002, we went to a video format to complement or to augment the audio format, and started recording all the episodes as audio and video.
That's great.
We made a move from CBS Radio Odyssey to Cumulus Media. And then we broke off and are just independent now under our own brand over the last 2.5 years. And we put out content every week. We also have a Patreon account, which is a video format, a pay for play video format, where we're rolling out exclusive mobsters, guys that have never told their story before, that you can come on and get content from them and stories from them and interactions with them that that aren't available on YouTube. And then just the thing that you can get on YouTube and on iTunes and Apple, Spotify, and all the places that you consume podcasts is deep dives into organized crime history. We cover mostly Italian mafia, the LCN, La Cosa Nostra, the underworld of bikers, the 1% world, biker bosses, biker clubs like the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, the Pagans, the Mongols. And then we also touch on the urban underworld with African-American drug kingpins. I'm currently have been working the last 3 or 4 years with Stars and 50 Cent G Unit on the Black Mafia family docuseries and scripted series, which is on Stars. It's been a big hit. And it chronicles the rise and fall of the Black Mafia family, which started in Detroit and then eventually expanded nationwide. And by the mid 2000s was the biggest domestic drug organization in American history.
That's great. I mean, that's perfect. I mean, that's everything you want when it comes to the true crime mafia mobster type of.
We were doing a lot. We were doing a lot of breaking news stuff, day-to-day breaking news, and we're kind of sagging away from that a little bit and putting more focus on historical deep dives now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I'm sad that I overlooked where it all started. It all started with just great interviews and great subjects and guests, and that's really the core of the podcast. I really buried the lead on that. Sorry, guys. So we get exclusive, never heard before voices, guys that are on both sides of the law, guys that lived it.
Mm-hmm.
And were ex La Cosa Nostra. In some cases, we've had some current La Cosa Nostra guys that are from the biker world. Again, guys that are from the drug kingpin world, and then a lot of FBI agents, DEA agents, U.S. prosecutors. Then we'd love to have authors on that are guys that are promoting books in the genre, historians, researchers.
That's great, and that's why I had somebody like you, because you're the man. Seemed like they all go to. So I got them. I got the main one. One thing you did talk about. You talked about Kansas City getting kind of a not the praise it when it comes to the mafia as the bigger cities, but also Detroit kind of got overshadowed by Chicago and New York. So, but for you doing your research and being from there, what made Detroit's crime scene unique, and why do you think it hasn't received the mainstream attention as these other cities?
Well, it's an East Coast. There's an East Coast bias. First of all, it's like the sun rises and sets in New York City, and if it doesn't happen in New York City, it doesn't happen. So you have that. Outside of Detroit, Chicago had Capone, who is the icon's icon when it comes to the world of the mob, even though he really didn't operate in the modern day mafia structure, La Cosa Nostra. He was only a part of that for about a second before he went away to prison. And, he was operating at a time where things were more disparate and disconnected. But just because of his, people associate the Chicago mob with Capone. So, they've gotten their due, but people associate Detroit with Motown and
that's true.
The auto companies.
Yeah.
Now both of those entities had ties to the mafia.
They brought them all in.
Entities helped in both of their respective ascent in their respective spaces. But that's by design. Detroit never really wanted the attention from the public. They wanted to be, and it sounds cliche for people that lived in this world, and it was a term that was coined by one of my mentors, George Anastasia, and they want to make money, not headlines, and that was kind of the mantra. And with Detroit, it was always violence was a last resort measure. They were all very diversified. They were all, the second generation was all educated in that the founding fathers told their sons and nephews that they couldn't come into the ranks of the crime family until they went and got college business degrees. So that's how they pushed the needle forward in the years after the family was founded. And then intermarriage was another staple to how the Detroit crime family was built. You were encouraged, almost kind of forced in a way, to, if you were going to marry, you were going to marry the sister, the niece, the nephew, the son, the daughter of somebody else in the crime family. And then insulation and diversity, and I guess that's a big term right now in our culture wars. But if you want to, I don't even want to use not to get too political, but in a time period where most cities, Italian mobs, if they were dealing with other ethnicities and other racial groups,
right,
it was most likely adversarial. And if they were working in a manner where they were working together, they were never really, the outside group was never really trusted or never really benefited really to that much degree financially or ability to rise through the ranks. But in Detroit, they've always really, it's equal opportunity. And the only color that matters is green. And if you're a Jewish person or an Irish person or a Polish person or a German person or a Black person or a Hispanic person or a biker, and you can make, or in Detroit, Middle Eastern is a big part of our racial makeup or ethnic makeup. And if you can make us money,
they didn't care.
you're gonna be more powerful than guys that are Italian and that are button men.
Right.
So you can be a guy that you've been initiated into the organization, you have a button, but if this Jewish guy and this Lebanese guy are making us more money, guess what? They're going to be more powerful than you.
Yeah.
And it's not going to matter that you're Italian.
Well, actually, like Frank Sinatra was like that. Even though he technically wasn't Mafia, but he was very connected to the Mafia.
He was very connected. He was connected to all the different mobs in all the different cities. In Detroit, he would run around with the Giacalone brothers.
Oh, wow.
And they were known to escort him around town when he'd be in Detroit. And there were a couple places, restaurants and clubs that they were known to post up at. Roma Cafe, Vince's, Giovanni's. And later in time, back by the 70s and 80s, they were going to a place called or maybe it was more the 80s, a place called Excalibur.
But he was very open to racist, like when it comes.
Oh no, he was almost personally responsible for
Sammy Davis
integrating Las Vegas. Like he said that if Sammy can't stay at the hotel that I stay at, I'm not gonna be playing your city anymore.
Yeah, which I love that, and I mean I've always loved his voice and his music, but I love that about him even more, knowing that. Well, you talked about Detroit also being a very important part of the motor city when it comes to the automobile industry, music industry. In your research, many of the criminal organizations were deeply entwined with the law enforcement and politics and business. How did you see this personally, the connection play out in Detroit's history? How did you personally see it and also research it?
You're talking about Motown,
yes,
the record label? Or
no. I'm talking just Detroit itself when it comes to law enforcement and politics and just other
Oh, okay. You're
businesses.
asking me what's the relationship
Yeah,
with
how did Mafia intertwine with all these different? Because we talked about with the automobile industry and Motown, but when it comes to just regular law enforcement and politicians, how did it intertwine with that?
It was very, Detroit law enforcement, politicians. It wasn't always civil. It wasn't always for civil servancy. It was a entrepreneurial endeavor. Sometimes being a Detroit Police Department. A lot of our mayors have had dubious ties to criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Our mayor, all the way back in 1930, got ousted in a recall election because of his ties to the mafia. Mayor Kavanaugh, who was the mayor during the 60s, Mayor Gribbs, who was, I believe, in the 50s and 60s, Albert Cobo. And then in the 70s, Coleman Young, who was the first African-American mayor of any major American city, and had a background and a family that were tied into the drug and numbers trade. Was somebody that never charged or convicted, but was believed to have been a pay-for-play legacy. Somebody that if you had enough money, you could get access to the mayor, whether you be a racketeer, a drug dealer, dirty politician, dirty businessman. And then Kwame Kilpatrick, who was our mayor in the 2000s, got convicted of racketeering and was sent away, got the longest prison sentence for a politician ever.
Wow. How long did he serve?
He did 30. I shouldn't say. Let me back up. He was sentenced to 30 years, the longest political corruption conviction ever. But he only did 7. President Trump pardoned him in 2020 when he was leaving office in 21.
Okay. Wow. I did not know that. That's pretty interesting. I just love to hear these stories when it comes to the back ends. That's why people like you that bring this to the forefront, especially as you and all of us all have heard many, many years. There's been movies about it, books about it, is of course Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
That's how I always, when it comes to my grandfather being part of the Teamster Union, then Jimmy Hoffa was the head of that. So first of all, with your research and everything that you've heard, what is your theory on his disappearance and what really happened to him? What do you think happened to him? And why did he disappear? Because if you didn't see the movie, you may not know, but could you talk?
He disappeared because he was making threats on national television to the most powerful mafia bosses in the country, and that just doesn't fly. I mean,
no.
that's a quick soundbite of breaking it down to its most cellular level. You can't get on national television and, for all intents and purposes, tell the commission, which is the mafia board of directors, to fuck off.
Right. You could.
That's what he did. I mean, he went on 60 Minutes and said that. He was making threats, not just verbally on television and radio and in print interviews. He was making it part of his campaign to reclaim the Teamsters Union as president, where there was going to be an election in 1976. Announced his candidacy in late 74, was killed in mid 75. he was making the cornerstone of his candidacy that he was going to come back into office and he was going to cleanse the union of the very mafia corruption and infiltration that he had ushered in. And he had the backing and the power, or he had the backing and the support of the rank and file to take power again. So that essentially is why he was killed. It didn't help matters that he would become an FBI informant, and rumors started to circulate of his secret cooperation with the government, and that the government had, according to the underworld lore, the government had said, Jimmy, you give us information on the mafia and we'll get the ban that it was part of your pardon from the White House to get out of prison early, that bans you for running for union office for 10 years. We'll get it lifted. So the belief was that he had flipped in order to get the ban lifted, that he was going to be allowed to run in 76, that he was going to win in 76 and boot out the mob guys that had control of the union. And when you had control of the union, you had control of the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, which was billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, as a piggy bank to go grab low interest, in some cases no interest loans on a variety of business endeavors, most notably the casinos in Las Vegas.
Wow.
And he was going to cut that off. He was going to cut the spigot off, take the golden goose away.
Did he really think he was going to get protected from?
Yeah, it was hubris. I mean, hubris is what killed him. He thought too highly of himself.
I was going to say
that he was beyond being killed by people that kill people every day.
That's what I mean.
And go have a sandwich and a glass of wine and don't think twice about it. And he somehow thought, oh, these guys would never touch me.
Well, they did, and somewhere he's buried or torn up or eaten up.
Well, I think he was killed by a Detroit hit team. I don't believe that anybody from another city had to come in here and do the job. So I would tell everyone, don't believe what you see in The Irishman or other movies that tell you that New York had to send somebody, or Pennsylvania had to send somebody, or New Jersey had to send somebody. This was a Detroit job, and Detroit, historically, as a general rule, in the Detroit Mafia, I should say in the American Mafia, the Detroit La Cosa Nostra family is known to have a PhD in mob murder. And they have successfully killed dozens of people without anybody ever getting arrested. And Hoffa was an asset of the Detroit Mafia. So when the decision was made that he had to be killed, contract went to Detroit. The Giacalone brothers were given the contract. They were close to Hoffa. They arranged it. And then I believe he was incinerated. And there's no body, and people have been running around for a half century looking for something that doesn't exist. I'll tell you that the final straw, the thing that the fuse that was lit to actually get the murder contract in motion was early July. He died on July 30th. Early July, there was a car bombing at a bar right by the Teamsters headquarters, and it was targeting the Fitzsimmonses, which were his successors, former proteges, and then became his rivals and his successors, Big Fitz and Little Fitz, father and son. And when that happened, the mafia said, that's it. He's trying to kill our guys, and now we're going to kill him. And then 20 days later, or 21 days later,
he was toast, as we say.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of killings, and in your book you cover serial killers as well as mafia figures and drug kingpins. How do these type of crimes intersect in the history of Detroit? I'm curious to how you tied serial killing in there.
Well, just to be clear, my Detroit True Crime Chronicles book was not a book that was strictly about the Detroit Italian Mafia.
Right.
I touch on other infamous crimes and criminals from the city's history. So I didn't really tie serial killers to the mafia per se, other than that they're in a kind of a book that is a chronology or a what's the term I'm looking for, is a anthology.
Okay.
Uh, but to me, the most important unsolved crime in the history of Detroit and the history of the state of Michigan is not the Hoffa crime, but it's this. I believe that the serial killer case that you're referencing, Oakland County child killers, or I say Oakland County child killers. People say Oakland County child killer, but that is a fallacy. There was not one serial killer. There was not one
Oh,
Oakland
wow.
County child killer. There was a group of them, um, and it's been unsolved for 50 years. And the reason it's unsolved is because of massive, massive levels of corruption, the highest levels of law enforcement and politics. It's one of the most disturbing, gut wrenching tales of of unaccountability and deviant behavior. It's a child sex trafficking,
Hmm.
murdering, prostitution,
Wow.
kiddie porn ring that was being run and being participated in by very powerful men in the Detroit business community, in the Detroit uh, judicial community, in the Detroit
Wow.
um, auto auto company community, and as a result, it got buried and has been continued to be buried. Um,
Hmm.
and I know there's going to be some new reporting that's coming out. I hope this year, not from me, but from people that I'm in contact with, that's going to shed some light. And there's going to be a name that is synonymous with politics in the state of Michigan,
Oh, no.
who you're going to find out was taking bribes to cover this up. And one of the bribes led to the murder of one of the four victims. Um,
Hmm.
and it's really, I would urge people to Google it and research it. The Oakland County child killer, or I should say, the Oakland County child
Killer.
killings.
Yeah, killings. Okay.
Four young uh, children were kidnapped, raped, photographed, videotaped, and murdered between 1976 and 1978. Um, I believe there were more, but we know for sure there were four definitively uh, put at the doorstep of this conspiracy. And again, I believe
Wow.
there were a lot more victims, but
Oh,
so I felt the need to address it in the book, and
I'm
I
glad
haven't
you
written a
did.
lot about it, but it's something that I'm very passionate about getting resolution.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because, like you said, so many of these crimes like this go unnoticed, and the more exposure it gets, the more hopefully we can, like you
I
said.
think the one thing I'll leave people with, and maybe this will be a good tease to get you to look into it and see how just depraved this whole situation is. So the number one suspect in the crimes was a guy named Christopher Bush, whose father was the number three man at General Motors.
Hmm.
He was the CFO of General Motors. He was the man that was in charge of all European and Central America uh, General Motors affairs. One of the richest, most powerful people in Detroit. And his son, along with the son of another industrialist, one of the wealthiest families in Michigan. I think that's one of the suspects.
Yeah, one of them.
I think that's Lamborghini.
Lamborghini.
That's his last name. I think it's Larry Lamborghini here. Uh, so the alleged masterminds of this was this Christopher Bush, whose father was the CFO of General Motors. And the other one was a man named Frank Shelton, who came from a family that was one of the original Detroit, Michigan industrialist families. And in a matter of a couple months, Frank Shelton, when he was about to be arrested, got on a private plane and fled to Europe, where he lived for the next 20 years and died without having to account for his actions.
Wow.
And Christopher Bush ended up being killed either by suicide or from his own family or from somebody else. And right after Christopher Bush's death, the murders stopped.
Oh, really?
And Christopher Bush should have been arrested before the fourth victim popped up dead. He was in custody, and very powerful members of law enforcement that were compromised came and got him out of where he was jailed.
Mm-hmm.
And a week later or 2 weeks later, Timmy King was kidnapped, raped,
Jesus.
photographed, and killed. 12-year-old boy who actually went to the same elementary school that I went to and disappeared from a grocery store, drugstore parking lot that I spent a lot of time at as a kid. And
wow.
So just to show you how high it reached,
that's pretty...
and then the cover-ups that
shows you what money and power can do.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent.
No, actually, listen, I brought it up, so I'm glad you said that. And just a couple more questions, and I'm going to combine the two. Is writing this book, you're touching on a lot of secrecy. You're touching on a lot of underworld, and so was there any pushback, threats, anybody saying that you shouldn't be talking about this information in your books? And then also, is there any crime that has not got the attention that it needs to, that a murder or something that you feel needs to be, well, I guess you just touched on one, but is there another one that maybe should have more attention and brought to the forefront?
I guess I'll mention two. But first, I'll say that that book came out. We're talking about True Crime Chronicles. I mean, that book's been out for over a decade. Mm-hmm. My reporting, just as any crime reporter encounters, there's going to be people that don't like what you write, whether it's about them or their relatives or someone they're friends with.
Right.
I have an kind of an open door policy. I'll talk to anybody. I'll go sit down with anybody. Don't hide behind my computer screen or my platforms to put out news.
Right.
I think that's earned me the respect of a lot of these people that I cover. But yeah, some of them have been upset. Some of them have been pissed off. There's been a couple times where I've felt threatened. None of it has come from the Italian mob. But there were one or two times in my 20 years of doing this or 18 years of doing this that I felt threatened, but you take precautions.
Right.
And if someone's going to be crazy enough to try to hurt a journalist, then
you're right.
That's kind of on them. It's not something that usually happens in America. I'm not dismissing that it could happen. And again, you take the precautions that you need. I'm very careful to I'm very careful to be very careful. When I'm in certain cities, because my reporting now extends way beyond Detroit. When I'm in New York, and I'll tell people I'm with, like, don't post. You can post me like that. We had dinner here, and here's a picture, but don't post it while I'm there.
Right.
Like, I don't want guys
Showing
that
up.
have an issue with me in the Bronx to
Right.
see, oh wow, Scott's at this restaurant right now. He just sat down. He's having an appetizer. We can make it by dessert.
Right. And you don't want to be one of those statistics.
Yeah. So I've found that you talk to people that are mad at you, just the exchange of feelings and opinions heal a lot of wounds.
Yeah. No.
They just want to be heard. I can sit there and you want to yell at me and tell me I'm stupid and don't. I have no problem with it. I understand it from your perspective. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to tell you my reasons for why I reported that or why my research said that, and I'm going to stand by it. But at the same time, if I got it wrong, I'm sure a lot of people. I hope a lot of people in this world, if you ask them, hey, I called Scott. I told him he got this wrong. It was really wrong. And Scott fixed it. He either changed he edited it, or he made a retraction, or I'm not above making mistakes.
And you're not doing it just to get likes and clicks and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
You tell me I got something wrong, I'm my toughest critic. I mean, if I get something wrong, it eats at me.
Yeah.
So I want to know if I get something wrong. I want to correct the record. In terms of and then I'll also say that I think the idea, the perception, even what I thought when I got into this world was that the majority of the people were going to be mad at you or against it. That It was going to be like 80-20, like 80% of the people were going to be really mad and aggressively against what you're doing, and maybe a small slice will like what you're doing. But what I've encountered is it's the opposite. The 80% of the people that you're writing about like it and want you to keep writing about them and want to give you information to write about them, opposed to the smaller slice that feel aggrieved and want to be aggressive in their dislike for you or dislike what you're reporting.
Yeah.
I had a mob boss from New York shut down my website for a couple of days because he called at that what that was at which at the time he contacted GoDaddy, which was my server, and said that I had posted a private photo of his that I didn't have license for, and it was a prison mugshot, which, by the way,
that's not private.
That's not private. And right. And I had to go through and I called the GoDaddy people. I was like, you shut my website down for 2 days just based on this guy telling you this?
That's weird. How they can do that. But he's like, listen, if you don't shut it down, I'm coming to you.
Right. So if I had to mention two cases that I've investigated that I feel like need attention, besides the Oakland County child killer, just in Detroit, if we're just talking Detroit, I'd say that Joanne Matuk case, which is a very strange, very disturbing case of a woman that was, I believe, killed and dumped in the Detroit River. Officially, it's ruled a suicide. Grosse Pointe police. Grosse Pointe is a very, very exclusive area in Detroit. It was actually the area that all the Detroit Italian mobsters lived. And it's a lot of auto executives. It's the two most exclusive cities in Detroit to live are Grosse Pointe, which is east side, and Bloomfield Hills, which is west side. And Grosse Pointe Police Department looks very compromised in this. All the facts around it don't point to a suicide. It points to a murder.
Right.
And it's never been solved. I believe The investigation dovetails with the Oakland County child killer case, which is why I believe it hasn't been solved, because of the corruption that both cases encounter. The Mattouk case was from 2011, I think, 10 or 11. Oakland County child killer cases from 50 years ago. And then the other one I'll say is there was the murder of a federal witness back in the summer of 92, I believe, and or maybe 93. I'm fuzzy on some of the dates. I apologize.
It's all right. I don't remember dates
and with this guy Theodore Shipp. And Theodore Shipp was a black drug dealer, businessman that was married to very powerful women, or romanced very powerful women, was married to a judge, and then at the end of his life was married to the sister of the Michigan Supreme Court Chief Justice, Conrad Mallett, was married to his sister, Lydia Mallett. And he cut a cooperation deal on a Thursday, and they had him in a protection suite at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel that weekend. Him and Lydia Mallett and their newborn child. That Saturday night, there was a Mafia party, a 50-year anniversary party for one of the very big Detroit mobsters, Tony Giacalone, who was actually the guy that headed the Jimmy Hoffa conspiracy, murder and kidnapping conspiracy. And during that party, there was a 10-minute gap between the FBI, DEA, marshals, protection people that were watching the door. The one shift was ending and another shift was beginning, and the one guy that ended his shift, or the group of people that ended their shift, left the door at about 9:45, and the person replacing them didn't get there till 10 o'clock. You weren't supposed to leave until someone replaced you. Anyway, in that 15 minutes, someone went in to the suite and killed Theodore Shipp. That person was then killed a couple months later. His body was found in the trunk of a car at the airport.
The person that killed him was killed?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and I'll just to draw a line, I think that some of this corruption that I'm talking about in Oakland County child killer, in Joanne Mattouk, also play a role in Theodore Shipp. So I'd like to see. I don't. There never will be. Right. But I'd like to. There's a better chance, I think, to have resolution in Mattouk and Oakland County child killer than Theodore Shipp. I think for his family, he deserves to know why, in my opinion, that someone in the government gave him up and and tipped off the mafia that a federal witness was teed up for execution in a 15-minute window. And why would the government do that unless it exposes other pieces of wrongdoing? And from those murders, there was also right after Joanne Mattouk disappeared, another, and then was found floating in the Detroit River. There was another Detroit businessman named David Widlack who was found floating in the Clinton River. And I believe his murder was tied to this corruption.
Wow.
So I would like to see all of this stuff get light.
Especially to see if there's any connection.
Yeah. Outside of Detroit, my real passion project that I'm hoping to get to a streaming service sooner than later is the Lawrence Spear case. And Lawrence Spear was a 20-year-old girl who went to the same college that I did, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. She was there about 10 years after I was there. Girl from New York that came to Indiana to study fashion and business, and disappeared one night in June of 2011, and was most likely killed by somebody in her friend group or a group of people in her friend group. I believe they were Detroiters. I won't go any further than that. And because of money and privilege, this case, I would say money and privileged, and a police department that was just out of their depths. Bloomington Police Department is not it's not NYPD. It's not
right.
It's
right.
solving a crime like that was just kind of, I think, they didn't have the skill set to do it.
Right.
And when you combine all those factors, we're now 14 years later, coming up on the 14-year anniversary, and this girl is lying buried somewhere. Her family has no resolution, and the culprits, all the suspects, are all off living their lives in New York, in Denver, in Florida.
Wow.
They're all in their 30s. They all have families, and nobody has ever been held accountable for the death of Lauren Spear, and it's a tragedy.
Yeah, I don't know how
again, I believe it involves levels of, and I don't necessarily think just because you get a lawyer means you're guilty, because these kids all kind of got vilified because they all lawyered up right away. And I think it's just like, hey, if I come from the family that I came from, which is similar to the families that they came from,
right,
kind of upwardly mobile.
It was just smart, but
right. So it's unfortunate. I would encourage people to Google Lauren Spear as well. So those are the cases that kind of keep me up at night.
Well, we really appreciate you, Scott, and we hope to come back and talk more Mafia and other true crime stuff. I love that.
Go on Netflix and check out my White Boy documentary. It's called White Boy, about White Boy Rick, who was this is kind of how I made my bones as a reporter. I got a guy that was wrongly imprisoned, out of prison after 33 years. He was a white drug dealer in an all-black universe, but the story that people didn't know until later, and because he was a white guy that was a teenager, running around with all these black drug dealers and dating the mayor's niece at that time. He was dating Coleman Young's niece, who was African American and almost 5, 6, 7 years older than him. It attracted a lot of headlines, and then people kind of forgot about it after he went to prison. But the story that really needed to be told, and the story that got him out of prison, was that he was recruited by a federal drug task force as a 14-year-old boy, straight out of junior high school.
Wow.
He was a couple weeks out of junior high school, and he was recruited by FBI agents, Detroit Police Department agents, and DEA agents to go undercover into the drug world of Detroit. And it was all a means to an end to get the mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young. They were convinced if they got this drug dealer named Johnny Curry, who was married to his niece, that they could get Johnny Curry to flip on the mayor. And the way to get Johnny Curry was to take this 14-year-old white kid and toss him into the lion's den.
Wow.
And then once they got Johnny Curry, and Rick at that point was 16 years old, they were like, well, he can't be out there knowing what we know that we put him at, So then they lock him up. And for a kid who was 16 years old and was stopped in front of his grandma's house, and they found some kilos of cocaine in his car, that shouldn't be the end of your life.
Yeah.
But they got him on that, and they put him. He was sentenced to life in prison. We started to tell everyone the true story about it and how he was an actual victim of the war on drugs, and we started reporting on it, or I started reporting on it in 2007, and we eventually got him out in 2020. And there was a movie called White Boy Rick with Matthew McConaughey.
I'll definitely have to watch that.
that you can watch, and then there's the documentary that I'm more proud of and had a bigger role in producing it. That's on Netflix.
I'm definitely going to watch it. I'm also going to listen to your podcast, the original Gangsters. When did that get? Every week, or is that?
Yeah, we're putting stuff out on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
We don't really have a schedule. I really should. People tell me I should have a schedule. Like everybody knows at this time, stuff's dropping. But you're going to get 3-4 pieces of content a week between interviews, histories, and news, like what's happening on a day-to-day basis in American gangland.
And you also can go to gangsterreport.com and look at all his information, books, and podcasts, and everything you need to know about Scott. And Scott, thank you for being on the show today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate you. Like, share, and comment on our website and on our YouTube channel and on our podcast platforms. Please subscribe, share it with everybody you know. We appreciate you guys for being here every week. I'm Tony Sweet. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.